Hello folks, this is Laerun with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to go over some basic map tools features within the Fantasy Grounds Unity platform. So I want to kind of take a little time to explain some of this stuff. This is going to assume you have at least a standard license. If you're a player, you won't be able to do this, but if you do have some content, this will be helpful. So first things first is I actually started a blank image, so I don't have anything, no maps, nothing. So what I've done is I've went into the assets catalog, which is over here on the right hand side, and I have this yellow cursor. Hopefully you can see that. So essentially I have a bunch of assets. So this is assuming that you have a Fantasy Grounds art subscription or that you've imported your own assets, depending on what your case is. But once you have them in the system or in the back end of Fantasy Grounds, if you put them in your campaign folder or in the data folder where the images go, you hit this refresh button down here at the bottom. Fantasy Grounds will rescan your hard drive and it will pick up your assets. Also, if you have a Fantasy Grounds subscription, that will download to your computer or you'll be able to access them depending on what you've purchased. You can buy it individually, or you can pay monthly, or you can pay yearly, whatever you want. But nonetheless, I've already went here and I searched for some items, so I don't have to do that 50,000 times during the stream. And if you're going to be making maps on the fly, it works to have dragged those specific assets as you want to use down to the hotkeys. So I've already picked up a background, a door, and a crypt hallway intersection. So I wanted to make this quick and easy, and the best way to do that is to temporarily put them down at the very bottom toolbar so that when you're getting ready to build your map, you're not constantly coming to this asset window and searching for one thing, closing it, coming back, searching for another thing. It's easier if you just keep this open and search for a majority of your content first, and then drag and drop them onto these hotkeys below until you're done with your project, and then go on to another part of it. So you can kind of compartmentalize it to make it a little bit simpler for you. So for instance, if I wanted to look for, I don't know, let's say let's go with the chest, treasure chest. So I'm going to type in chest. I'm going to assume that I have one in my library. I don't know if I actually do. I should, but nonetheless, I'm in the images section. I'm going to go ahead and search for chest. The search window takes a minimum of 3 characters. You can also use a space or an underscore if your item doesn't have 3 characters, but I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And once I do that, it's going to pull up anything that has that label. So here's a chest up here at the top left. There's a chest down here. So these some are open, some are closed. So I'm going to grab this chest on the top left and drag and drop this asset down to the bottom left corner here in slot 1 for the asset. So I'm going to left click and drag that down to this hotkey. So now that I have all that done, I've already done most of that ahead of time, I'm going to go ahead and close the assets. So that makes it a little easier when you're getting ready to build a map. The next step, and always the first step that you want to check, is for you actually have a grid. So the image is unlocked here. This is a blank image. There's nothing here yet. But I want to make sure I have a grid. So I'm going to turn on the grid by clicking over here on the right-hand side. Now, most of the time when you purchase content, it's already going to have the line of sight and the grid set up. But this is going off the premise that you want to create your own thing or maybe add to something else. So make sure the grid's on, and then turn on the visibility, and you'll get yourself a grid. It always defaults at 50 by 50. That's fine for what we're doing right now. You can change that if you like, but in this case, we're just going to stick with 50-50. Most of the assets that come with the Fantasy Grounds platform, you get a few free ones when you first buy Fantasy Grounds, or if you have the subscription, are based on this grid. So if you don't know the actual content, like some of this stuff is 1 by 3, so it kind of gives you an idea of the size it's supposed to be. Here's a 6 by 2. But some of them don't have that labeling, so you're not going to have any idea what size they are. So if you just drag it to a map, you're not going to know at all like what size. So that's already huge. Like that's a whole room size. So you don't know the asset size. But when you actually go to the layers, which is one of your tools, this is an 8 by 8 chest. That's huge. That's like a 40-foot chest. So this is what I'm saying about assets, is you kind of have to get familiar with them and rather intimate with them so that you can understand what size they are and such. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the selection mode, and I'm going to click on the asset and hit the delete key. The ideal thing you'd want to do in this case, if you're not familiar with your assets or what you have, is you want to drag and drop this instead of onto the map. Drag it onto the layers and this tile section and treat it like a stamp or a tile. So I'm going to drag up to from the bottom left corner. I'm holding my left mouse key and dragging and dropping. So now it will show me it's an 8x8 asset. So I want to go ahead and just change that to 1x1 because that's a huge chest. So now when I click on the map, it should only take up roughly 1 square. That's right. So this is more to scale with your map. So when you're using assets, unless you specifically know what size or scale they are, I would honestly put them in this layer tab first and then place them on your map so you have more control over it. And even before you place it, you can rotate it, you can recolor it, all that stuff before you even stamp it on the table. Now, one common mistake that I have made, and I'm sure plenty of you out there have had this trouble, is now I want to move it. So what the natural thing we'd want to do is click somewhere and try to drag it. Well, you're still in stamp mode once you've stamped something on the map, if you're in the layers tab. So essentially, if I click again, it's going to draw another chest. That's not what you want. So if I want to get rid of that, since I haven't done a whole lot else, I can hit Control-Z, which will essentially undo. Or I could highlight this in the selection mode, layer selection mode, and hit delete. So that's the key, is to make sure that you know where you're at when you're doing the manipulation of images. So you have kind of a drawing format, and then you also have a layers format where you can select, move, drag, resize, that sort of thing. So that's something you got to get used to. If you stay in the stamp mode, you're going to keep stamping 100,000 copies of this. Unless that's what you want to do, I don't think it's a fun thing to deal with. So just remember, once you've placed something, you need to switch over to the selection mode. Very important to remember that. And that's true of when you're drawing line of sight and all that other stuff that's related to the Fantasy Grounds tools, is when you're in the line of sight tool, that's the same thing. You have a selection tool and then you have drawing tools. And quite often you'll forget which one you're in, and you go to touch it and all of a sudden you're drawing lines when you wanted to actually move something, and vice versa. You got to be careful with that. So the next step is I'm going to place a background image, so I just have a canvas to draw on. So I don't know what the scale is of this exactly, and if I just drag it on here, it's just going to be this image that I have no clue what it's going to look like. So instead of dragging it straight to the map, I'm going to go to the Layers tab and drag it into this tile area. So I'm going to take this background image, right-click, and this is how you can edit it, or you can delete it if you want. But I'm just going to left-click and drag, and I'm going to drag it up to the tile. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can see what size it is, so that in relation to the grid scale. So left-click and drag till I get up here, and let go. And that's a 25 by 25 tile, so that's a pretty good size. So if I click on that, normally when I'm placing something, if you want it centered, you want to click on the vertice, or where these lines meet. So I'll click there, and that's my tile. That's a pretty good sized tile, and that's exactly what kind of a thing that I wanted. And you also notice that it's not completely to scale. So it could be that the grid is not the right size, or we can move this to where it kind of fits in the pocket here instead of a half or a quarter of the sheet. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the tile. So to grab an asset or a tile, you need to go to the layers mode, highlight or click on the asset, and then drag it by left clicking and holding the mouse button down and dragging it. So that's a good sign. It's lined up now in these corners. I kind of wanted it squared up. You don't have to do that, but it makes it a lot cleaner, a lot nicer. So I just have a canvas now that I can draw on and use this as my background, just so I have something other than this grid. And that comes to mention the grid itself. We can change the color, because right now it's kind of a gray color. It gets washed out. It might be something that doesn't look too good with the contrast. So what I'll do sometimes, depending on the color of the map and the assets, is I will move that grid, or I will change it or rescale it. And in this case, I'm going to color it. And if you notice, that chest that I had earlier is covered. And that's because there's different layers here. So the background layer is sitting on top of the chest layer. So if I want to fix that, I need to click on the layers on the right, left click and drag upward, and make sure that this chest is on top and not underneath. So that's another thing, is you need to manage layers occasionally when you're drawing things. So that's the background is now underneath, which should be the bottom layer, and the chest is on top of that. So I'm going to lock the background layer because I don't want it to move accidentally. So now I've got it locked so that I don't accidentally move. So that's one step that you should do once you got something placed that's important, such as your background image or your main map. You want to lock that layer if you don't plan on editing it anymore. The next thing is I have this chest here. So I want to place some map assets because I want to go over all the different lines and the shortcuts. So I already placed this chest here, and if you miss any of this video, you can always go back and watch. But I have the a background already shortcutted, and I had the chest shortcutted on the bottom left corner. And now I'm going to drag and drop a light intersection just so that we can illustrate how to use the map tools and also how to use tiles. So this is a dungeon tile that's 6 by 2, so that means 6 squares by 2, but let's see how it scales. So I'm going to left click and drag and put it in the tile area. And it says 6 by 5. So that is a 6 by 5 scaled image, but let's see how it comes out. So that 6 by 2, I'm not sure what that means, but that was the title of the asset. So I'm going to click somewhere on this grid just to see how it looks. And that essentially is the tile that I'm going to place. So I don't like where it is because it's kind of half on, half off of this grid. And that could also be the scale that I have. Maybe it should be 100 instead of 50. But I'm going to go ahead and move it. So I want to make sure I'm in the layer selection mode. I don't want to be in stamp mode because then I'll create another one. And I'll just go ahead and drag and put it in a kind of more of a squared position. And as you can see, there's already a chest here. So what I might do is, since I'm already in this mode, is left click to select the asset, drag it over here, and then you can rotate it with these rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. And then as you can see, I put it there so that I'm just going to cover the asset that's already there. And I'm going to flip it around so it's like this, so it's more oriented like this other chest. And if I want to shrink it, I can hold down the shift key and drag this left corner, and it will actually shift so it doesn't distort. If you hold the control key, it'll actually stretch and distort the image. But if you hold the shift key while you're dragging these edges, it'll actually just scale it, and it'll keep its ratio instead of getting all wonky. So I'm going to go ahead and move that. And then if you want the snap to grid to turn off, because if you move this, it will snap to every half grid. So if you want to precisely locate something, you can hold down the control key and move this around freely so it doesn't snap to the grid anymore. Or you can turn off the snap to grid in the interface, and that will shut it off temporarily so you can place something. So as you can see, it's not perfectly placed as a grid, but it is placed so that it has a kind of a uniform look, and it covers up the initial chest. So that is just something that I put on here just so you can kind of see how to place assets if you have any. So that is basically how you place these things if you want to. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take another tile and place it next to it. So again, I want to make sure I'm in the tile layers section, and I'm going to drag and drop this exact same tile, but I'm going to put it down here to the south or over here on the right. So I'll put one on the south and rotate it before I place it. So I'm going to take the same intersection, exact same asset, left click and drag and bring it up to the tile area. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and bring this up to where I can actually use it. So this is called a crypt hall intersection. So I'm going to make sure I got the little hand. And now that I have that, what I'm going to do is, it's another layer on here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this map here. And as you can see, that's where it is essentially. This is not the orientation that I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the highlight, which is going to the layer selection. And I want to click on it, hit delete. So what you can do in this case is I'm going to re-drag it. I wanted to show you that. So take this shortcut key, make sure the little hand is showing, and then left click and drag. And now that I have it up there, I can rotate it. So that way when I place it, it's a lot closer to where I want it. So go ahead and click now. And as you see, it's pretty close. Now I'm going to switch over to the selection tool, left click and drag, and then it's going to butt up with this other one. It doesn't look too bad, but it looks off a little bit, so that's probably because of the way the tile's drawn, so we'll just leave it as it is. But at least the grid is lined up, so that's perfect. But I think this offset just comes from how they drew this image, because you can see it's a little bit off in here. So it's not perfect because it's like a dungeon wall, so no big deal. Alright, so that's how you essentially create any... when you want to create an asset and you want to place it somewhere. So I don't have a door, so I'm going to place one right here in the middle because I want to show you how to place a door, and then we'll actually put some sort of line of sight on it later. So I have a door asset here, and it's probably only 5 foot wide, so we might have to change the dimensions of it. So I want to drag and drop the door up into this tile area. So if you have a door tile and you want to place one where there wasn't one, or maybe there's not one drawn on the map, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take the crypt door, which is the asset name, left click and drag it up to this top area. And as you can see, it's orientated to where it's actually turned sideways. So I want to actually flip it around so that it's kind of lined up one way or the other. So let's see what this looks like. So it's 1 by 2. So I actually want it to, there we go. Let's see how that looks. So 2 by 7. So let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to click here in the center. And as you can see, there's the door frame. So that's pretty close. I mean, that's as close as you're going to get. Now this area here is actually part of the wall. So it's kind of like, you could fill this in. I could make that door a little bigger. So aesthetically, it works, for an asset. It's a closed door. You can see that it's got a portcullis here. But what we can do with that is we can actually stretch it a little. So I'm going to go to the selection tool. I'm going to hold the shift key and just drag this left corner a little bit to where it kind of butts up more with the actual tile itself. So it right there looks kind of like it's more part of the map, but again, it might be a little much, so I might go right about there. So that looks a little better, but it's not as blended in as you would hope, so that's another thing. So I'm going to hold the shift key and I'm going to actually drag this asset. So I'm in the layer selection. I have selected the layer, and if you want, you can move these around. But see, what's happening is it's getting scooted underneath this aisle, or this tile. So I want to make sure it's above that. And then what I can do is go ahead and move it as I need to. So if I wanted to put this in some sort of special location, I could. Or if in this case, I might hold down the shift key and kind of recenter it because it looks a little off. So I think that's pretty close. I don't want to go much further than that, but that's essentially a portcullis. It's not really a door, but you kind of get the idea that you could place a door if you wanted to. So this is a portcullis, so we can work with that too. So now that we have that in place, now our map is starting to take shape kind of. But once we get all the assets placed, and we have an idea of where we want everything, then the next step would be obviously to start putting in line of sight and such. So there is no good rule on how to do line of sight, but there are some tips that'll make things easier. Normally you want to start with your terrain or your walls or those sort of things. So I'm going to go ahead and do the walls first. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop just a square on top of this for the line of sight. So I'm switching now over to line of sight tool. And as you can see, this already has line of sight built into it because these are tiles that were made this way and they already have the line of sight set up in them. So you just have to make some minor adjustments. But like these things here, these are like minor little things for the bars, so it kind of gives you that shadow. But when it comes to the actual doorway, we're going to probably draw a glass window type thing in here. That way you can still see through it, but you can't walk through it. So these bar things are unnecessary unless you want to actually make those for the decoration and for the shadow. But you can use a shadow caster if it's outside, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to adjust this. So I don't need these edges anymore. This has to do with the way it was drawn. So to get rid of some of these lines, I'm in the selection mode. I'm in the wall mode. I'm going to left click and drag, and that'll select all the points here, or I can double click and hit delete, and that'll get rid of that entire segment. So that's all I'm doing there, is kind of getting rid of the excess lines. Now for this actual line of sight for this door, I'm just going to draw a basic red line, and I am going to draw past the line. So don't try to click on the line, just draw past it or through it. So I'm going to go to the line tool. I'm in the wall tool. I'm going to left click and hold down the shift key, and then drag over and double click to end the line. So the reason I held the shift key down was because it will keep the line straight and I don't have to worry about the line meandering. You can also go in 45-degree angles. So it just depends on, it's set up for 90 degrees or halfway through 45. So now that I have those lines in there, if you have to, you can come back and clean these up. So that would be just me going to the selection tool and just single clicking on this little end here and hitting delete. And that's essentially all you have to do to clean up these little tails. So I'll just click here and hit the delete key, and I can click over here and do the same thing. So that's how you clean up those lines if you're interested in keeping your lines straight, nice and tidy. So these areas are open because this implies that you're actually going to be able to travel further in the dungeon, so we'll leave those open. But if you want to see how the shadows work and the line of sight work, we're probably going to have to draw a rectangle around the entire thing. So what I'd like to do is or just leave it like this and just pretend like this outdoors is part of this actual dungeon. So we'll just leave it like that. So the next thing to do is we're going to put a door in, or a portcullis in this case. So if you wanted to do a solid door, you could use the door tool. But in this case, we're going to use a window. The reason we're using a window because it allows you to see through this area, but you can't move through it. So I'm going to draw a window through here, and then I'm going to go ahead and allow for the lighting to go through. And then when people want to actually move through this area, you can open the window essentially, which means they open the portcullis. So I'm going to go to the rectangle tool because that's roughly the shape I'm going to draw, and I'm actually in the window tool. Now I'm just going to trace around this area and kind of make a little window area, and it's not going to be perfect. There's no reason to get too crazy or have to worry about it. And then you want to make it a little wider than you think, because when you're actually using this map, when you're playing, it's harder to click on the asset. And now that I've left click and drag to make that rectangle, I'm going to let go. And Fantasy Grounds automatically cuts out that middle line now, so you don't have to go back and manually do it. So if you were making your doors beforehand and then doing the wall tool, you're not taking advantage of this new, or somewhat new, trim interior occluders. And sometimes when you have a double line, you have to turn it on manually. But in this case, it was a single line, no problem. So when you're doing this, you want to take a token occasionally and test out your line of sight. So I'm going to go back to the play mode, which is up here on the top right, and I'm going to drag and drop this human character because he doesn't have any form of lighting. And then when I move him through, I'll be able to tell once I turn on the line of sight, like what this stuff is going to look like. So here's without the lighting. Here's with the lighting. So the reason I can't see anything right now is because this actual token here does not have any form of vision or lighting. There's nothing that gives this person the ability to see, which is accurate. This is a human with no dark vision, no lights, there's no torches, there's nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the interface, and I'm going to just drag and drop a candle on him just so we can get some light. So if you come up here to the top right, there is some actual effects, and in the effects area is this candle. So you can either drag it onto your token or you can drag it onto the combat tracker. So I'm just going to drag this candle and drag it onto his combat tracker entry, and as you can see, now he has this candle. So that's how you can see in a dungeon or in a place with darkness, is if you have a candle, you'll be able to see this and drag it where you need to if you have a light source. Now if you don't have a light source, it's going to be very difficult to move around. You can also use the arrow keys to move this token if you need to. So there's that. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the characters are seeing. Now if I disable the player vision, now I can see the whole thing as the game master. So as the host, you have a little bit more control over this and such. Now if this token wants to move through this doorway, I could take this and unlock or open the window, and this is why I wanted you to make it bigger. So now when you move through, you can. The only problem is that they drew those portcullis things in here, so now you can't move the token through. Yes, it makes the shadows, but it does not allow for the token to move through here. So if I go back to the line of sight, you can see these little things here. These are unnecessary, and obviously whoever did this was in the early days when they were still learning how to use this line of sight tool. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the selection tool, and I'm in the wall tool now, and I'm just going to left click and drag around those points and hit delete because they're unnecessary. And honestly, if you want the shadows from the bars, if you have an ambient light source, like if you're outside, those will create shadow. But if it's indoors and masked off, it won't work. But nonetheless, if you want the shadows in there, you have to think of something different. So this is something that can come up during gameplay. So that's why it's good to get to know a little bit about the map tools in case you need to make adjustments. You don't necessarily have to make all this stuff yourself. A lot of the modules already have all this built for you. But if you want to edit anything or change anything or fix anything, it's a good thing to know how to use the tool. So essentially what I've done is I've left click and dragged this doorway, which is actually a window. But we're using this as the function of the portcullis because you can still see through it, but you can't move through it unless the DM has unlocked it. So that's what I had done, is now that I have unlocked it, I can actually move this token through if I'm in play mode. So when you're in play mode, that's the only time you can interact with the actual token. So now that I have that selected, I can move through. So we can assume that he found a switch or somebody on the other side opened it up, and then he was able to get through. And once we're done, if we want to lower it, we just close it. So now the token is going to have a hard time. They won't be able to move through there. So if you're the DM, you can hold the shift key and move them through that way, but the players cannot. So I'm going to pause right there for drawing and setting things up. So some takeaways from this is you want to do the line of sight and the walls first. That's important so that you can take advantage of the trim occluder feature, which automatically removes that center line out of here. So let me go back to line of sight. So if you want this center line removed automatically, you left click and drag and make this like rectangle, and it will automatically remove that center line for you. Even if you do a door or window, it works the same way. So the other thing is when you're drawing these red lines, you don't have to have them perfect. And on top of that, when you're drawing a line through, all you want to do is go ahead and just draw through. Don't worry about landing right on the line because it's very difficult. Now I'm going to show you how to actually remove a line. So let's say we don't want this line here. This is a line, it's an intersection. It's not a big deal, it's not going to hurt anything. But I want to show you how to remove the line. So without clicking on these ends over here and making a big mess of this, what we're going to do is actually draw a line. So I'm in the line tool and the wall tool. I'm just going to left click and drag. And now we've made this center line. So now we can just take this and go, okay, so now we have this line here and we have this point. So what I'm going to do is double click, and I want to make sure I'm in the selection tool. So double click, that'll select all three of these points. I'm going to hit the delete key, and that gets rid of the temporary line. And then we're going to single click on this thing here, the center line, not double click. If you double click, it's going to get rid of all this stuff here, this entire line. We just want these segments. So if I hit delete here, that removes the center line, and it leaves whatever we want. So let's just say you want to get rid of this point. You decided that you didn't like it, or it's something that you didn't want. So same thing is you can just take and go to the map tool. So if you single click, now you'll select that actual vertex here. And then you can actually take and remove it. So if I take this, you can delete the selected points or remove it. So I'm just going to remove it. That's all you have to do. So I'm highlighting that point and selecting remove, not delete. If you delete it, it's going to delete the segment too. So if you have extraneous things here, you want to remove the selected point, not delete it. So that gets rid of extra dots if you don't want those. So this is just how you clean things up. And again, I want to remove these two lines here. So what I'm going to do is go to the line tool. I'm just going to click out here and double click. And this makes this vertex here and these little dots. Then I'm going to go to the selection tool, double click, and it's going to select all four of these points and hit delete. And then just single click on these lines here, and that will clean up those inside lines, just like that. So that's how you clean up stuff if you're really that particular about it. Those weren't going to hurt anything, but nonetheless, that gives you an option. Again, I want to get rid of this point, so I'm in the selection mode, so I just left click and drag to highlight it, and then remove selected points. So I'll show you what happens if you delete. So I'm going to come over to this other line here and select that line, and I'm going to click on delete. So if you delete, it also deletes the segment. You don't want that. So to undo or to fix that, I'm going to hit Control Z, which is going to replace it or undo what I just did. And instead, I'm going to hit remove selected points. And that's just going to get rid of the point, not the entire segment. So that's important to know that. So this is just little things that you got to learn as you're using the tool. So now that I have that fixed, now I could do the same thing for this area here, and you'll get more efficient with this as you use the tool more. So I'm going to again go to the line tool, left click and drag, and actually just go like this, so now I can actually remove all this stuff a lot quicker. So I'm just going to go to the selection tool, double click, select all those points and hit delete, and then this leftover dot here, I'm going to delete that extra little gap there, this line here and this line here. And then to get rid of selected points, I'm in the selection tool, and I'm just going to left click and drag, and that's going to select these three dots here, and I'm going to click up here, remove selected points, not delete. And all that does is remove the points. If you hit delete, it's going to delete the point and anything attached to it. So that's how you clean these lines up. If you really are particular and you're picky about that stuff, that's how you do it. So again, I'm going to go to the line tool, drawing a line, double click, drawing a line, double click. And then when you're all done with that, then you go back to the selection tool, double click to select all 4 of those lines, hit delete, double click to select all 4 of those points or lines, hit delete, and then single click to delete these segments that you don't want here. Single click is just going to remove the segment and everything and the line itself. So now you have those all cleaned up. So if you don't like the way the line of sight came out, that's how you do it. Now let's say that you wanted to insert a line. Maybe there's a space in here that you want to move, but you can't because you don't have any points to drag or move from. So let's just say you wanted to move this line, but you can't now because you've removed all of your, say you don't have these points here anymore. So I'm going to remove that point, and I'm going to remove this point. So if you want to re-add a point, you just draw a line in here. You left click and drag, and there's your dot. And now we're just going to get rid of the extraneous line. So double click to select all 3 of these segments or all 2 of these, hit delete, and now you have this line. Significance of this is now you can take and drag this if you need to and make an adjustment. So that's just a way that you insert a line if you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. I don't need it. There we go. So this is why I'm kind of going over this. So Control Z will remove the last action you did. I think you can go up to 10. I don't remember what the limit is, but there has to be some limit. And then Control Y will redo. So if you accidentally go too far with the undo, you can go to Control Y with the redo. So if I wanted to put that point back in there, I can hit Control Y. I think. Yeah, I guess it didn't do it in this case. But if I had a line that I drew and I delete it and then I redo it, it'll let me redo that. So that's how you clean up lines. And like I said, when you're drawing a line, just draw through. You don't have to click on the line exactly. So let's say you wanted to draw a line through here. So instead of trying to click on the line itself and then hope that it connects, you want to just, this is just drawing a line here. So instead of trying to figure out if you're going to make it through, so this actually worked because I clicked over here on the left, so that's not bad. I'm going to hit Control Z to get rid of that line. But sometimes you'll click like here, and you won't notice it until you zoom in. So now you got to come back, select it, drag it to make this thing close up. So it's a lot easier just to draw through and then come back and clean this up than trying to land on that line automatically every single time. It's too hard to do, especially if you're zoomed out. Like if you're zoomed way out here, it's hard to tell. So I'm gonna just remove those points. I don't need them. So just knowing these little things are going to save you a lot of headaches. So that's just a suggestion. You don't have to do it this way. This is just a tried and true thing I've learned over the months. Been doing this for about a year since it came out. I'm getting a little bit more proficient with the tool. I have a long ways to go. I still need to learn how to use the brushes, but at least I have the basics down in regards to the actual line of sight and the doors and such. So now we have some columns in here. So you have to make a decision about these. So do you want line of sight or shadowing in here, or do you just want them to look decorational and you just don't want people to move through them? So you have a couple choices. You can make it terrain, and the only time I'd make this terrain is if someone wanted to climb on top. These don't look like something that you're going to be climbing on top of. They're probably just a support pillar. So I'd probably either make them a solid line, or if I wanted to have more detail but I didn't want the players to move through them, I'll just make them glass or just make them a window. So being that they're round, this is one of the few occasions where you actually get to use the ellipse tool. So I'm going to click on the circle tool. I am going to go ahead and make these solid, so these are going to be line of sight. But one thing you want to remember is when you're actually doing this, you don't want a huge circle that's going to cover everything. You just want to go on this inside. So I'm just going to left click and drag. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of get the majority of it. And I can come back later and move those. So if you don't have it dead center, don't worry about it. Just get the basic shape in there. And then we can come back later and move. So I'm just left clicking and dragging to roughly about the size that we want. And then letting go of the mouse key. There we go. So let's say you don't like that it's off-centered so much. So you got to go to the selection tool, double click on one of these points, it'll select all of them, and then you single left click and just drag it into place. So you can move these shapes around and do the same thing here. So double click, and I'm going to move this to a little bit more in the center. So get all your shapes drawn in and then move them if you need to. This one's pretty close, but I'm going to go ahead and move it. So double click, and then once you have that double click and selected, now you can just left click and drag where you want it to go. Same thing here, just double click and drag. So let's just say that you're kind of pissed that you you didn't drag it enough, or the circle's not big enough. So you can always come in and drag these little points here. So if you want to, you can come here and drag these out a little bit. So if you made it too small, you can always come back and fix this by dragging, just clicking on a point and dragging it out, and that'll make it a little bigger. So you can adjust those if you. The trick is though, you don't want to drag this thing all the way out to the edge. What I'm saying is, if I go to play mode and I turn on this line of sight, move this token in here. If you do it too close to the edge, it's just going to look like this black blob. You don't want that. You actually want a little bit of that texture here so that your players can see that. Same thing with the walls. You don't want it right up to the edge. You want them to be able to see some of this. So now I want to add a little lighting to this corridor. So I'm going to turn off the line of sight for right now so I can see what I'm doing. And then there's a torch here on either side. So I want to add a little lighting to these tunnels according to how the map was drawn. So I'm going to put a couple torches there. But if I make it a torch, that's going to spill out in this entire area. You may just want to put a candle there. So it depends on what your needs are. But I'm going to go ahead and put a candle instead of a torch, because I don't want it too bright. So you have to switch to lighting mode. And one thing you got to remember is that once you start drawing on here, it's going to create a new layer, or if you select the layer that you want it to be assigned to, in this case, I'm assigning it to the tiles, you could do that. But if I click away, that is going to unselect, and now these torches or candles will be on their own layer. So I want to go to the lighting tool, and I'm going to click on the light bulb, which is add light. I'm going to click on the preset, in this case candle, because these are going to be like candelabra, or let's go with the torch. Let's see what that looks like. Or maybe lantern or whatever. So we'll do torch. And now that it's selected, now I want to click wherever I want to put the torch light. So I'm going to click on this area here and click on this area here. Now that I'm done placing those, it's made its own layer because I didn't have anything selected. I'm going to double click on that and call this torches, because I don't want to get confused as to which light it's supposed to be. And you could be more specific. I'm just putting torches because we don't have a bunch of rooms. And now I'm going to go back to the line of sight and turn that all on again, and let's see what we got. So now we actually have some area that's lit up. So he doesn't really need the candle anymore unless he leaves that area. So that's pretty cool. So there's your lighting that comes from the ambient light. And here's the portcullis. He can't get through there. If I'm the GM though, I can unlock it for him and he can move through. So that's essentially the base things that you really need to know in regards to creating lines and decorating your dungeon. So here's another chest here. So let's say I want another chest down here, kind of like it is up here. So again, if I want to, I could drag and drop this straight from the either from my assets or from my shortcuts that I made. But if I drag this straight on the map, it's going to be herking. I'll have no idea how big it is. So if I drag this on here, that thing fills up the whole damn room. So I don't want that. So I'm going to try to hit Control Z, which will get rid of that asset. And this time I will take this and left click and drag it up to the chest area. And then this thing is 8 by 8, so it only needs to be like one. Yeah. I don't need a huge thing like that. So here it's 1 by 1. And then I'm going to lock the aspect ratio. That way it stays even. And now I want to rotate it. So I'm rotating it to where it will orient similarly to the way this chest is. So I'm just going to click in the center. And there's the chest. And as I said, if you want to move this, make sure you're in selection mode. If you click again, it's going to draw another chest. So be careful with that. So I'm just going to hold this, and I'm going to hold the control key down and kind of move this and then shrink it just a hair. And then holding the control key down just to give it that fine adjustment. And if I want to change this one, do the same thing, and I'm just going to shrink it a little. Like I said, if you want to keep the aspect ratio, you hold down the shift key. So there we go. So there's the two chests, and then there's the actual thing. So I want the actual setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gas trap. So what happens is if you open up this chest, then what happens if you make your successful dexterity check or lock picks or whatever you want, or a strength check to break it open, what happens is these clay jars or inside of here will be a trigger, and these things will start to smolder and create a gas. So I want to create a gas trap in here. So what I have is this chest is going to be part of the gas trap. And then on the very bottom, I'm going to go ahead and open up this effects layer. But before I do that, I want to go back to play mode. I want to move this guy out of here for right now so I can set this up. And then I'm going to turn off the line of sight because I don't want to get confused, and I don't want all that extra garbage in the way, so that way I can see what I'm doing. So here we go. Now that I have that, I'm going to select the chest, and then I'm going to make a new folder. I want to call this gas trap. So GASTRAP. And what this is going to be is a setup for this chest and some of these effects. So now I'm going to add an effects layer, which is going to be just a mist. So I want to click on effects here on the bottom. And then up here on top, there's an effects drop down window. So I'm going to do mist. And what you'll see is a mist covers this entire map for now. So I don't want that really to do that, and I want the map to be, or I want the radius to be about 30 feet. So what I'm going to do is to put a mask on, which essentially covers that temporarily, and then I'm going to draw the area of effect. So I only want the gas to come out and spill out in a certain radius. So I hold down the Alt key, or if I want to, I can use just a square thing. So I'll do that for this area for right now. So that's essentially where the gas is going to be centered, and then I'm going to come off here by holding down the Alt key and kind of freehanding the rest of this so that it kind of has like a radius. That, and then same thing over here. So you can add to this. You don't have to do it in one go, actually. So I'm just going to draw the area where I want that mist to go. And now that I have that filled in, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and blur it a little bit so it's not right on the edge. And I'm going to turn the amount down just a hair, maybe down to 65. And then the speed of it for this particular thing is, if you have it on the center, that's neutral, it doesn't move at all. So I want to go with like maybe 52. And that's just the gas, or in this case, it looks like clouds, but I'm going to recolor this. So I'm going to go ahead and add another effects layer. I'm still in this folder. That's where I want this to be for the mist. So I'm going to move that down into here. And now I'm going to add another effects layer, This time it's going to be a color change layer. So you can go to adjust colors, and if you go ahead and move these, you can see it changes the whole map, which I don't want. So I'm going to add a mask, and now I'm going to actually just define the area where the mist is going to change color. So again, I'm just going to left click and drag, and this time I'm just going to kind of make it not the entire area, but just kind of draw this in as I see fit. And this is where the color change is going to take place. So there's the defined area where the actual stuff, the green gas is going to look where it's going to come from. I'm going to go ahead and put a blur tool on it so it kind of blends in. And then I'm going to turn it down so that it's not so bright. And then that's just the coloring for it. So I'll leave that there, but I'm going to go ahead and I want to make sure that it's sitting above the mist, but it's in the gas trap area, which is going to be for all the stuff that's related to this trap. And now I'm going to add another layer on top. So again, this will be another mist layer. So I'm going to go over to this thing, which is the mist. I'm going to see if it'll let me make a copy. So it's going to say duplicate selected layer. So yep, so I was able to make a copy of this, and the copy is almost identical, but I want to change the direction of the flow of this thing, so I'm going to go with 48. So what that does is it creates like the swirling effect, because I have two different directions of that going at the same time. So now when you actually look at this, it's going to look like there's a rotating amount of gas instead of just going in one direction. And then I want to go back to the color and adjust that down even more, just a little bit much. There we go. So now you can kind of see the mist layers, but I want to turn those up just a hair. And the adjust color, I want that actually in the center here. So what I'm doing is reordering these so that they make sense. And there's one set on the bottom, there's the color filter, and then there's another mist on the top. So it kind of gives you this kind of swirling effect, and then you have the color selection here. So I want to turn that down, and then I'm going to go to the mist here and turn that up just a hair. So each one of those mist is going to go up to, it was at 66, but now I'm at 76. So now you can see the mist a little better. So that's essentially the gas trap that I've created. And what I wanted to do with that is when the players come up here, if they try to open one of these chests, the gas will come out. So right now I don't want that active, so I can come over here to the right hand side where the layers are, and I can turn off the visibility for that. So right now it's not visible, it's still going, but it's just not visible to anyone. So when that player actually activates this, so let's turn on the line of sight here and all that good stuff. So we're going to pretend like we're playing. So I'm going to have him move through. He sees the chest, he wants to open it. So I'm going to go to his character sheet, take a look at his abilities tab here, skills. It's not really a rogue, but he does have stealth, so he's going to try to instead do a strength check and break it open. So he's not really much of a thief, but he is going to take his athletics, and I'm going to say if he rolls a 15 or higher, he can break through that chest. So I'll just left click and drag into the dice tower, and it looks like he 16. So he made a total of 19, so he broke that chest open, and once that happens, then I'm going to turn on the gas trap. Now I'm going to make him save versus poison. So if I had that set up like an NPC, I could do that. So if I go to the NPCs, and I don't think I have the books. Yeah, I have the SRD, so let me try trap. I think there is a trap in here. Nope. It's a fat chance. But what you could do is make an NPC trap, link it to there. If they do open that up, then you can have them roll. You can drag the roll onto them and see if they make the save versus poison, and if not, then you apply the poison condition or damage or whatever it is. So anyway, so that's essentially how this stuff works, is you have to kind of get used to the tool, And then you can do some creative things, and that's kind of what I've done here. I've made this little gas trap. So I'm going to go back to a little recap here. So turn off all this stuff here. So the first thing we did was we placed the grid, then we placed our lines, and we put in the doors, and then we placed the gas trap and such. So we kind of did it in a specific order. And if you make yourself a kind of a template that you do every time, like a procedure, it gets a lot easier. Like I said, you want to place all your stuff first, as if you're using tiles, or draw out your areas or paint them or whatever. And then you want to come in and make sure your grid is set. That way, do that first, do your grid. And as I was saying, this is kind of a gray washed out grid. So if you wanted to, you can go to the grid, go to tint, which is the color picker, and I can select yellow and then dial down the opacity so it's not so bright. Maybe down to about halfway, and hit OK. So now it's a little bit more visible, but it's not as obnoxious. So that's a way that you can make your grid kind of stand out, but not be too crazy. And you can see this gas trap is still going, so I'm going to turn that off. And it's just a matter of getting used to and practicing the tool. You're not going to get this right, like the first time you use it. The other thing is, just using the platform, keep practicing with it, and that will help you digest the tool. It took me a couple months to really get a good feel for how to use it, and then it takes me, 6 months to get really proficient. The idea is to do it in steps and try not to switch back and forth between all the different tools, as that adds a lot of time. So you want to get used to doing all your lines first, and then doing all your doors, and then doing all your terrain, or vice versa. But as long as you get the walls in first, you draw the doors and such if you need to. So if you wanted to draw a secret door, in the case of this here, the process would be similar, except for you're going to have to do some adjustments. So I'm going to use this double wall because this is what I want for a secret door. So I'm going to go into the line of sight tool, and I'm going to click the secret door asset, or the tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle. So I want to put a secret door in this area here, and I'm just going to left click and drag and make this my secret door, just like that. So now that I have that in there, this did not cut itself out. I did not tell it to do that, because I have a double line here, so I want to show you how to fix that. So I'm going to hit Control Z, and that kind of undoes it. And what I want to do is, I'm still in this tool, still here, but I'm going to turn on this particular tool here, and I'm going to left click and drag and make that doorway again. And it should technically, yeah, so I didn't do it right. Let me try that again. Control Z. Okay, so I got the occluder tool turned on. You have to kind of be beyond the line, so that's why it's not working. So I want to be out here, potentially. Now that I do that, it cuts out that center line, which is what you want, but you're going to have to kind of match this up, and you have to close in this end, because the light will shine through there. So I'm going to go to the line tool, and I want to go to the wall tool, and all I'm going to do is click on these 2 points and close this end, because this is essentially the wall, and if you don't close that end, the light will shine up and through that wall. You don't want that. You got to close these if you're going to have the double wall. And this is the only time I do, is when I have a secret door or a hidden door or anything like that. I'll do something like this, but everything else is just a single line. And now I'm going to clean this up by going to Selection Tool, moving these points so that they blend in with the line that was already there for the actual door. There we go. So now when we go to the line of sight mode, we turn all that stuff back on, that secret door will be there, but it won't be, it's closed right now. So if I wanted to, I can open it, and this would be where he can come through. So this is just a way you can blend in the tool. You can blend in the wall. You won't be able to see it. But if he finds the trigger or the trap to open it up, then as the GM, you can click on that to open it, and then he'll be able to go through. So that's to blend it in. If you didn't put that in there and blend the walls in, what you're going to have is a lump here. You'll be able to see the doorway. That doesn't necessarily make it a secret. But now you got this little secret door you can have in there. So that's how you do that. But that's about all I'm going to cover. I'm not going to go into brushes or anything like that. That's more getting into painting. But if you are artistic and you know what you're doing, you can go to the brush tool. You can use the default brush and paint like this, or you can take a shape. So if I wanted to use we'll say this torch, I can use the torch as my brush and draw torches if I wanted to. So you can do that with wall tiles, that sort of thing. But I don't usually cover this. It's not something that I normally use. So I don't really teach it, and this is one of the things that I got to learn how to do. So I'm not perfect. I don't know how to necessarily do everything. I don't really use brushes, mostly the tiles, line of sight, or maps that already exist. I don't really get into the painting. If I wanted to do that, and actually going to start that next year, I'm going to start watching Josh's videos on the Saturdays. Right now he's been on vacation, but I'm going to watch his videos and see his techniques again, because he does a really good job with that. The only thing is you kind of have to know the basics of the map tools to kind of get an idea of what he's talking about. So I assume that you want to get to know how to use the map tools and how to do the basics before you start getting in all the painting and stuff, because that can get really confusing. One nice thing about painting is if you paint your own walls, it automatically will allow you to select to make the line of sight, so that's kind of cool. The other thing is you have more creativity and flexibility, and you can blend maps in better, but I'm pretty content with just tiles and kind of using it like a map tool and not so much like Photoshop, but that's another topic. But anyways, the other thing you want to remember with this line of sight, this happens a lot, so I'm going to drag another player on here, and then I'm going to draw this bad guy. I'm going to put them on here. Okay, so what I typically see, especially game masters, is if you are in play mode and you're going to be using this token, you need to select it so you can see the lighting. Otherwise, if you have someone else selected, you're not going to see what they're looking at. So in other words, if I pass the turn and it goes to the assassin, I'm not going to see anything. For one, the assassin doesn't have any light, but they do have a torch on. But if I wanted to see what they see, I need to click on the token. And I'm thinking that there are a good number of people that don't know to do that. When you use the combat tracker, it does not change the vision. So if I pass from the assassin to Gundren, it doesn't change the vision, it just selects the token. I need to actually click on the token to get it to see what that person sees. Same thing with Sildar, so when it's his turn, then I need to click on his token. So this affects DMs mostly when they have to switch between NPCs, but it does affect players that are using more than one character. So if you're one of those people that's playing two characters, you need to switch between the tokens in order to get the proper vision type. Because Gundren here, he actually has dark vision. So if I turn those torches off, let me if I can, yeah, so I'm going to turn that torch off. And as you can see black and white, and you can see a little bit of the candlelight coming off of Sildar. But he has black and white dark vision. Whereas this guy, Sildar, he has a candle. If I remove the candle effect from his sheet, only thing he can see is the torchlight that's already set up in here. So there's things that you have to get used to when you're using the interface, but you want to make sure that you have the correct token selected. And as the game master, it can get confusing because you're switching between different NPCs. So you have to click on the token. If you want to see what that person is seeing, you have to click on that token. And right now I'm in the player view, so it gets even more confusing when you're in the overall view. So if I disable player view and I select the token, it's going to be hard for me to tell which token I have selected. So I usually run it in player view mode so I know where I'm at. And then if I want to preview the overall map, I'll hit Control P, and that gives me the overview map instead of running it in the overview and then selecting that for other options. So I kind of run it the opposite the way it was designed. But that helps me, in my mind, figure out what's happening. So as the game master, you have to select between the tokens so you can see the different vision types. The other thing is, if you click it again, that deselects. So Gundren right now is selected. If I click on him again, it's deselected. So if you deselect, that means that you're not looking through, you're kind of looking overall. If I click on a token, that means I'm looking through the eyes of that token. And that's an important step in Fantasy Grounds to kind of get used to. Get over that bad habit of saying, oh, I can't see anything, or this guy not able to see. That's because you don't have it. You don't have them selected, or that token does not have a light source, or there's no ambient light going on. So that means no sunlight, no moonlight, or no glowing fungus in a cave or whatever it is. So you just select the token. That's all there. It's really the simplest way to explain it. If you don't, and you try to look, let's say it's the assassin's turn, but you're like, crap, I can't see anything. Well, that's because you didn't have the token selected. So you need to move the selection of the token as you pass the turn to your next players or your next NPCs. That's probably the best advice you're going to get today, is that. Once you understand that, it makes this a little easier. And then, of course, working this line of sight, you're doing your own custom stuff, can be a little bit of a challenge, but once you learn how the lines work and the little shortcuts, that really helps a lot. So Control Z will undo, Control Y will redo, and then you can draw in intersections, you can remove points that you don't need. Like this point up here, I don't really need it. So I can go to the line of sight tool, selection tool, click on the point, go up here where it says remove selected a point. If I delete it, it's going to delete that whole line. So I'm just going to remove that point. That's not something you would need anymore necessarily. Same thing with this point. If I single click that, remove selected point. So that's just a way to clean up the lines if you. And see, as you can see here, this is correct. You got these two lines closing this doorway. Now this thing here I probably don't need. So if I single click that, and then I don't know if it'll let me. Yeah, so I'm going to have to left click and select it, and then go to remove selected point. So that's how you do that. So if you can't click on a point, left click and surround it with the selection queue, and then go to the. So sometimes it won't let you click on it. I don't know why, but it just does that. All right, so that's how you clean up the lines. And like I said, you draw a line through there to add a point, and then you hit Control Z if you accidentally make a mistake, Control Y if you undo too far or need to redo something. And then just get to know these different tools up here. So you have a selection tool and the drawing tools. When I was placing the assets earlier, you have a selection tool and a stamping tool. So you got to break the habit of trying to draw with the selection tool or trying to select with the draw tool. So if I wanted to select a set point of line, so let's go to here, and I'm in the drawing tool, and I forget, I'm going to be drawing a line. Oops. So I'm going to hit Control Z. Now I got to go back to the selection tool and change what I'm going to do. So that's important to remember that. Or if you're in the selection tool and you're trying to draw a line, you go, hey, how come it's not drawing? It's because you're not in the drawing tool, you're still in the selection tool. So that happens quite a bit when you first start Fantasy Grounds. You got to break that habit. You got to get used to switching between selection and moving and resizing and then drawing. Once you get that down, it starts getting easier and you have less of that problem. It can get really frustrating if you're just in a hurry and you're trying to do something and you don't switch back to whatever you're trying to attempt. It can really piss you off. So just try to get used to using the tool and selecting back and forth depending on what you need. But I think I'm going to let you guys go. You guys have a happy holidays. I am teaching a class like this coming Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific or 7 Eastern. So if you want to sign up, in the Fantasy Grounds Academy, there's an event that's probably the last one for the year in regards to what I'm doing. I don't know if anyone else is going to be setting that, but nonetheless, happy gaming. I hope this helped someone. And if it wasn't what you needed, I apologize. I just do these occasionally to help people out and kind of share what I've learned. Talk to you later, and description will be in the title.